Thank you, Maggie. Hi, it's great to meet you all. My name's Irene. I am head of strategy at Layer Zero Labs. I guess brief background on myself. I joined the company about 1.5 years ago as a developer and then led our biz dev and integrations until 4 months ago when I transitioned to company-wide strategy. Just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you're a developer in the audience so I understand the background. Okay, amazing, cool. And raise your hand if you're focusing on like go-to-market or investing. Okay, awesome. I'm going to be talking about Omnichain Interoperability, and I think this is interesting and important for all devs, but also go-to-market leaders and investors as well, since the question 2 years ago was, will we be in a multi-chain world? But today, it's very clear that we're in a multi-chain present, and there are new alternative L1s, new L2s that get launched every single day. So we'll talk through fundamentals and scaling, and we might have time for Q&A. Okay, so what is omnichain interoperability? Oftentimes you hear people talk about different chains like they're different cities. I would actually argue that they're like different planets. Without a system for decentralized and trustless information sharing, how do you know that $1 million has been submitted on one chain and received on the other? There isn't an inherent communication system between all of these, and centralized systems provide this, but you're trusting the centralized entity. And you may have seen a headline that went out about 3 weeks ago that JP Morgan just accidentally deleted, I think it was like 46,000 or 46 million receipts, just like accidentally deleted. And if that had happened on a public ledger, it would be immutable and there and auditable forever. So interoperability is unified information sharing between these disparate networks. And how is this important for the user experience? It radically improves the movement of assets between chains, but also the developer experience. So now you can leverage the best of different chains. We have ZK Sync and Polygon ZK VM, but liquidity is on Ethereum. And now you might want to launch your game on an Avalanche subnet or a Polygon supernet. But how do you then have file storage? And there are always trade-offs with these different chains, but now with interoperability and this piping underneath the hood, essentially TCP/IP for blockchains, you can tap into the best and abstract away that multi-chain complexity for the end user. So now an end user isn't using a Solana-based DEX or a Polygon-based game. It's just a game, and it's fun, and it's just a DEX that works, and you just need one gas token and can do a transaction that might touch multiple chains in the particular transaction. And then also composability is so important. Let's say you're launching an NFT collection on Tezos, but you want a user to be able to use it as their avatar at a Travis Scott concert in the Sandbox. Well, that NFT is on Tezos and Sandbox is on Polygon. How do you allow users to move that asset without damaging the provenance or the actual quality of it by, previously we would be wrapping through a bridge, but wrapping carries inherent risks, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Maggie, could you help me with the signal? Oh, amazing. Okay, thank you. So what is Layer Zero? Layer Zero is an omnichain interoperability protocol. It's a generic messaging primitive, which means you can use it for any kind of arbitrary contract invocation. It's not just bridging. In fact, Layer Zero is one layer below that, but it's any kind of information sharing. And that could be triggering the mutation of metadata on a different chain based off of a message sent from one. It can be moving tokens between different chains. And it can also just be like sending receipts and like validation of what happened on one chain to another. And the holy grail problem we're trying to solve here is information sharing between disparate blockchains and abstracting away that multi-chain complexity. If anyone believes that the next 100 million users will come into the space and have to and know about and care about the difference between ZK Sync and optimism is out of their mind. And I always say, it's like, you probably haven't talked to your childhood best friend in a long time or called your mom if you really think that that's how we're going to bring in even the next 10,000 users. So I'm going to run through 3 key design principles that informed how we built our protocol. And I think for developers in the audience, you'll resonate with a lot of these criteria. The first one is immutability. So when I say immutability, I mean smart contracts that are not upgradable, designing primitives that cannot be changed once they have been pushed to a public blockchain. So there are a lot of issues with mutability and upgradable smart contracts. every upgrade resets all the security of the contracts that you've put forth. And so if we think about bridging in this particular context, that means let's say your bridge has secured 100 million in TVL over the course of 1 year, and then you push an upgrade to your code, that resets all of that security. And you could have introduced a smart contract bug. In fact, if you guys were all around last year, we as an industry lost more than $1 billion in value through hacks of bridges. And nearly all of them were because of smart contract bugs, not because of architectural flaws. It was because a developer who had the best interests of their protocol, maybe they were trying to introduce a new feature or were patching a bug, pushed something and there was an issue with it. And that's why we were drained of so much value from our industry. And so it's existential risk also for protocols built on top. There was one day this last summer when a new bridge was just drained of funds, and we had to sit back and just watch it happen for a few hours. And every single protocol built on top of it was also facing that existential risk. So here is the architecture of layer 0. Rather than running through every single step here, what you'll see is on chain A and chain B, there's the user application, which would be your protocol interacting with our endpoints. And these endpoints are smart contract libraries that are entirely immutable. And so the reason why we made that decision was, of course, so that as layer 0 labs, we could never make an upgrade that would then rug all of the protocols built on top of it. We as a company should not have any agency over how your protocol operates, and we also shouldn't be able to push upgrades that can put your users at risk. In the same way that if your Trezor or Ledger push some sort of upgrade, you would probably freak out. Why would you accept that? That's really high risk. It's the same with your DeFi protocol. Why would you buy into a monolithic layer of security that could change at any time, introduce a bug, and provide or introduce a vulnerability into all of the assets that you have stored in your protocol? And the reason why we did this too is so applications can always opt in to different endpoints. We believe at layer 0 that research will evolve and research should drive our industry forward. Most of us come from an academic background and think that the best validation techniques of today will not be the ones that we use 5 or 10 years from now. That means we can launch new endpoints that are immutable, that leverage ZK technology or something novel in the future, and applications can always choose which endpoint to point to. In between the endpoints are the entities that can be swapped in and out, and are the oracles and relayers, which I can get into if there's interest from the crowd. Here is a graphic that shows what I was talking about in terms of resetting security. So over red is all of the security over a period of time and the value that was protected and secured by that contract. And then in blue, you see the upgrade to the smart contract. From there on, it is essentially a new set of code and technology, and so it resets that time clock there. The solution, like I said, was library upgrades. Applications opt in to the smart contract libraries they want to use as part of the validation between chains, and it doesn't reset the security clock because they can choose to opt into one that has been securing value for, let's say, a year or 2 years, and there are no forced upgrades. The second principle is permissionlessness. We talk about this a lot across DeFi. Permissionless deployment for any developer means that in the off-chain entities, particularly in our protocol, any developer can launch an oracle or a relayer and can swap in and out the entities they wish to use. And why this is important is layer 0 was built to be a protocol, not a service. When you guys are thinking about your infrastructure stack, the last thing you want to do is buy into a third-party service that might run out of runway, that might charge you fees in the future, that might involve their founders getting arrested, which we saw last week with the multi-chain hack, or it had started about a month ago. You want the important layers of your infrastructure stack to be evergreen, to not be vulnerable to censorship, to regulatory changes, particularly in this environment. And the permissionless participation there is what I had said about launching different entities in the validation layer. Without immutability of your smart contracts, permissionlessness is never guaranteed. And that's so important. Like that immutability of the smart contracts is what is necessary for this important principle to be upheld. And then the third principle is one that I don't think we talk about enough when it comes to messaging protocols and bridging, and that is censorship resistance. If you build your technology in a way in which it can be perverted to some kind of different law or regulatory environment, your technology will be forced to comply in that way. But if you build immutable primitives which simply cannot comply, they never will. And so we built Layer 0, the protocol, to be nonce order enforced, meaning messages can not be rearranged. They have to be sent in the order in which they were submitted. So that means a high-frequency trading firm can't reorder messages to extract more MEV. That also means if a nation state were to use cross-chain messaging for voting, there couldn't be, I guess, like a withdrawal of 100 votes to make sure that they weren't passed through. If a message does not go through, it blocks the entire pathway. And so the voting just simply halts. And that's really important also for DAO governance right now to keep in mind. So now I'm going to talk through two new standards which developers can use to start to integrate the multi-chain, cross-chain, omni-chain future and actually improve user experience. And that's OFT and ONFT. OFT stands for Omnichain Fungible Token, and ONFT is the NFT equivalent of this. We are now seeing protocols adopt this as a quicker way to launch their tokens in a way that's native on multiple chains. And how this works, rather than a wrapped asset bridge, is different contracts launched on all the chains act as ERC20s, for example, but leverage Layer 0 messaging to manage state between them. So why are omnichain assets a better user experience? Well, I would say primarily because of user security. That's one. With wrapped asset bridges, which was the previous paradigm we were in to move assets between chains, how it worked was users would submit their funds and that value would be locked in the smart contract. So you're trusting the security of that contract to maintain the integrity of the assets in there, and then you would be issued an IOU, or a synthetic asset, saying, when you want to cross this bridge back again, you will get the real thing. You'll get real USDC, but for now you have X version of wrapped USDC. So that means that if something happens to this bridge, your version of wrapped USDC could depeg. And we saw this happen a few days ago with the Phantom ecosystem and multi-chain assets. And now users who can't cross this bridge back because all the funds have been stolen have a bunch of meaningless assets. They've lost, I think cumulatively in the hundreds of millions of dollars now. Wrapped assets are a perpetual security risk, and it's putting it in the hands of users. When you think about Uniswap, or like that first magical experience you had with DeFi, it was likely a very atomic experience in the sense that you went to do a swap, you bore some smart contract security risk for the duration of that transaction, but as soon as it was done, you weren't still carrying that risk. And with other protocols now that keep this in mind, they design it so maybe the LPs bear risk, but the end user should not, as soon as they get the value that they wanted out of that experience. And again, as we're building protocols and we're trying to bring in net new users, we want to get them to receiving the value they want as soon as possible. That could be having fun in a game, that could be swapping their assets for a different stablecoin, whatever it is. We want to eliminate the churn, but also the baggage that users have to carry. With omnichain assets, your tokens are native on every chain in which you decide to deploy the contracts, and all users have to do is pay for gas to transfer between them. Let's see if it comes back. Okay, it's all good. It's the ultimate form of an extensible token contract, and what's so important is that the application developers own all of the contracts. There isn't a centralized entity that maintains custody of them. Layer 0 Labs has no bearing over the movement of these assets, freezing them, whatnot. In fact, as I had mentioned before, Layer 0 Labs is the creator of this protocol, but it's not a service. And what I mean by a service is you depend on the integrity and liveness of the parent company to make updates to the code, to run some sort of ongoing customer service of sorts to make sure that you can continue leveraging this service, kind of like RPC node providers. Instead, it's just an immutable infrastructure. You own your security as well. And that's specific to the off-chain entities I was speaking about before. Own your fees. You could add a fee or a spread on top of transfer for every token movement between chains. So if you're launching a new stablecoin, you could add 5 bips on top of gas, and that's new revenue for your DAO. Or for NFTs, if you wanted to do a migration or open the portal to allow users to move your NFTs between different games and different subnets or supernets or app chains, you can do that and take a small spread. And then also, the whole world can compose you. different protocols can embed the ability for these assets to have meaning within them. And I talked about a version of this with a Travis Scott concert in the Sandbox, and wanting to use your Utes as your avatar in the Sandbox. 2 minutes? Okay. This is a graph that's showing the growth of the token supply and also the movement of BTCB, which was a version of Wrapped Bitcoin that Ava Labs issued about last fall. And once they converted to an Omnichain asset, it just spiked, and it's been exponential growth. And we've been seeing this across a bunch of protocol tokens, but also new stablecoins. And so as you guys are designing your protocols and thinking about how to increase the velocity of usage of your token, this is something to really study and understand, because it greatly reduces the barrier to entry, but also the barrier to usability of your token. And this is an additional one from Azari that just shows the token supply growth. So just to round it out, since we have about a minute left, we're in a multi-chain present, and my thesis and our thesis is that it's an omni-chain future. By the end of year, we'll have maybe 50 forks of the OP stack and different chains as part of the super chain, Base, Zora chain. Those are some that I'm really excited about. And then we also have new ZK EVMs like Linea. And how does your protocol keep up with all of this without isolated instances of your protocol, meaning like entirely relaunching it on one other chain? And how do you enable an abstracted away experience of this, so users are just interacting with a financial product, not needing to know the intricacies of different chains or being involved in the tribalistic affinity of particular ecosystems. It's using a cross-chain messaging protocol as the piping underneath all of this. And as you guys are all designing your protocols, thinking about these really important security trade-offs, user experience trade-offs, and longevity trade-offs as well for what you're building. So thank you guys for listening. This is some contact if you want to stay in touch.